But hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for what's going to be a shenanigan-filled episode of The Lost Bots, I'm sure. I'm your host, Jeffrey Gardner, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Stephen Davis. So for those of you who don't know us, why don't you give a little brief intro, Steve, and then I'll follow in, and then I'll stop sharing the slides, and then we'll get right into the meat of the day.
Yeah, sure. Stephen Davis. I am a lead technical customer advisor here with the Rapid7 MDR service. Been with Rapid7 for quite a few years now, even decided to do a short stint as the sales technical advisor as well. So I've been in multiple groups and capacities with Rapid7, but my all-time favorite is working with Mr. Jeffrey Gardner here at Lost Bots.
And just fair warning, Steve was my CA when I was an MDR customer. So we have a long-standing relationship, even prior to us partnering here at Rapid7. So thanks, Steve. I'm Jeffrey Gardner. I'm a practice advisor here at Rapid7. What that means, we're all still trying to figure out. No, I'm just kidding. I call myself like the jellyfish internally at Rapid7. So some days I'm working with marketing, some days I'm working with sales, other days I'm with dev and engineering, looking at new UX designs. I kind of just go wherever the tides take me. And do what the title says, advise, consent, what's going to make our products and services better for you, our current customers, and our prospective customers. So let's stop sharing the slides. Cool. I can see everybody. Today's episode is a bit different than our usual ones. It's a live episode, obviously, but it's also being recorded and is going to be on the Rapid7 YouTube channel. And it's a two-parter, part two. First part is all about presentation skills, from structuring your presentation, engaging your audience, understanding the audience, all that good stuff. And then part two is going to be putting everything together, getting into the metrics, what's effective, how to use them to support your story, visuals, all that fun jazz. But to kick things off, for you, Stephen.
Yep.
So you said you worked as a customer advisor, sales technical advisor, now lead customer advisor. When you're working with customers, have they ever, brought you in to present internally, or, if not, what kinds of reports and things have they generally asked you for?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So yes, to answer your question, I have been brought internally multiple times to present to the customers, board, senior staff, things like that, or just their own internal cyber teams. So depending in what capacity of who I'm meeting really dictates what I would be presenting. So for instance, if I'm presenting to the upper echelon of one of my customers, I would have to be very careful with what I'm presenting, because they might not be overly technical, or they might not care about the specific technicals that I'm presenting. They're more for KPIs, how the service is doing, how it's benefiting them, and essentially making sure that that investment into Rapid7 is going to be fruitful, right? So depending on the meeting, I presented everything from, an overview of findings since the beginning of their service, post RIR information that was relevant to them, to kind of give them a sense of, what had happened, how Rapid7 stepped in and was able to assist and prevent things badly from happening, so on and so forth. But usually the upper echelon wanted more of the KPIs, wanted more of the overall service statistics and things of that nature. Now, for some of the customers that I did presentations internally for their cyber teams, that got way more technical and was more dashboard related, was more slide deck presentation related, going after, how the MDR service had made their lives easier. Which would include dashboards, which would include generalized reports, going over, investigation trends, what the analysts are seeing routinely in their environment, how we were able to, eliminate the false positives by routinely going through and triaging everything and picking out what is normal and abnormal in their environment and things like that. So, yes, long answer to your question is I have absolutely gone in and presented findings and been a spokesman essentially for the Rapid7 MDR service, and it
I was
really
just
pertains.
expecting a yes, dude. Like I didn't
Oh,
expect story time.
my bad.
Didn't expect story time, but hey, that's all the better. I mean, that's awesome. But
it depended on my audience, man. But we have to be flexible and be able to pivot really quickly and to segue to know our audience.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in a bit we're gonna kind of go over, what are the 8 kind of key things to include in the presentation. But kind of a follow-on question to that would be, you tailored the message to your audience and the content of it. What about your delivery style? Like the actual, because today's all about, today's a little more style over substance. The next episode, we're not recording the next one tomorrow. That's for darn sure.
Yep.
The next episode is going to be substance, but the presentation itself, like what was your general demeanor, your delivery? Did you adjust that as well for the audience, or do you generally present in a similar fashion no matter who you're speaking with?
Yes.
Dang it, don't do that. This one's story time.
So yeah, absolutely, you need to read the room and know who your audience is. I do have as all the CAs do, I do have a baseline style that I go for, right? It's just who I am, and I don't typically deviate from that because I want to be as natural as possible. Now, what I will change, depending on who my audience is my delivery, right? Certain audiences require a little bit more formality to get your points across, right? I'm not talking about brown nosing or anything like that and kissing up and just throwing buzzwords out there. But for a formal setting, my delivery would be a lot less than something we're doing right now. Right. Whereas
you would be like, that's lit fam to a bunch of
no sus.
No,
that's cap, man. I think that's one of the words, cap.
I don't even know what. Yeah, I guess no cap,
No.
maybe.
No cap, no sus. Anyway, but if I'm delivering it to as a CA to the customer POCs, I default to an informal delivery, right? I don't sugarcoat anything. If it's a no, it's a no. I'm not beating around the bush, and that's important, right? As part of my style, it's more natural. I'm not a big formal person myself, but you still to be good at this job and any job where you're talking to customers and stuff, it's very important to be able to literally at the flip of a script change how you're talking, the tone you're talking in, and using more breaking it down Barney style. In some cases, you have to be able to do that. So yes, it does require reading the room and then making the correct adjustments. But as long as you're not just overdoing it and you're coming off naturally, you're well received.
Awesome. So you hit on a lot of the points that I'm gonna hit on in a bit. But like to start things off, like the essence of a good presentation. And again, chime in whenever, agree, disagree. But the structure essentially is fairly simple, but the devil tends to be in the details. So, and again, knowing your audience, addressing the audience in the correct fashion is always important. But overall, like 3-part structure to any presentation or talk or meeting or whatever that I've ever given starts with, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to tell them. Then I tell them, and then I tell them what I just told them. And the reason why is the average person's undivided attention span. And this is where kind of want to do a little ask the audience. So if you want to throw in the chat, feel free, or throw it in Q&A, wherever you guys feel most comfortable. But just to poll the audience, what do you think the average adult's undivided attention span is? That means like you're solely dedicated to like listening to this webinar right now. Like, Steven, what do you think the average adult's undivided attention is? Well, I know yours is going to be a little different than everybody else's, but what do you think yours?
I was about to say, dude, my personal experience, my attention spans sorry, I forgot what I was saying.
Dude, you got me. You actually got me with that one. I was like, dude, stay on script.
I would say a minute and a half.
minute and a half. So we had somebody in the chat say 45 seconds. Actually, the average, so the scientific studies and all that fun stuff, if you believe in science, which sometimes you should, sometimes you got to question it. The average person's undivided attention span is around 20 to 30 seconds. So the reason why I bring that up is that structure. You have to engage, re-engage, re-engage, re-engage all throughout your presentation or your meetings. I'm not a very political person, even though I do have a degree in political science. But if anybody remembers the days of the Bush v. Gore debates, like nobody really remembered what Al Gore had said, but everybody remembered what Bush had said during those debates because he picked the three most salient points and just hammered and kept bringing them back in over and over again until at the very end, if you remembered nothing from what he said, you remembered those three things. So there are various ways to do that. But I think, first up, when it comes to telling them what you're going to tell them, like I just said, you start that with a purpose statement. And that purpose statement is basically, like I said, if they're going to remember that one thing or two things or three things when they leave, what would it be? And that purpose statement, like the way that I normally say it after the intros and pleasantries are over, is key point I'd like everyone to remember today is whatever that may be for you. And if you don't actually, if you can't actually come up with a key point that you want people to take away from them, maybe this shouldn't actually be a presentation or a meeting. Maybe it should be an email or something that was sent out that way. Because if you're not going to engage, then you're going to have people looking at their cell phones. Next up is an objective, mission, or goal. So I'm trying to make this very formulaic for everyone, so you don't have to, do it on the fly. So don't go too deep with that objective. Keep it at the 50,000 foot level. So my objective is to show where our most salient risks are, and that purpose and objective, that's what's setting the agenda for the entire meeting or the presentation. Right. You follow it up with the situation. So that's where you list your issues, concerns, success, obstacles, and then you ask the question again, like audience engagement. Is there anything I should be aware of, before we proceed into the main body of this meeting or presentation? Has any of our objectives or mission changed? And you're doing that to engage the audience, but also to make sure everyone's on the same page. And like you said, if not, you can pivot and keep those things in mind for a later point in the presentation to address their concerns. And then, what are the benefits? What are the consequences? Basically the implications of either taking action or not taking action. And then lastly, what that action plan is. So all of that should literally be 60 seconds. You can get it up to 2 minutes, but it should be real quick, fast, because again, it needs to be brief, it needs to be salient, and needs to keep everyone on point. So
yeah, and one of the tricks too that can be exceedingly difficult, especially for somebody like me who has a natural short attention span and the gift of gab, is also kind of being like a unofficial moderator of the meeting. A lot of these meetings that I've held with customers and things like that, it's very easy to get pulled down that rabbit hole, right? Because you articulate something or you say something that piques somebody's interest, and then they just jump right in. Right. And it's very easy to segue and kind of derail yourself. So I like your points about, doing your best to bring it back that medium level, because in going down that rabbit hole with that individual, yeah, you might come across some great information and great interactions, but ultimately you could be potentially losing the remainder of your audience. Right. Which then once they're disengaged can be exceedingly difficult to get them re-engaged back in. Right. So it's actually an art form, if you want to kind of look at it that way.
No, it very, very, very much is. And it's an art, and I'll repeat this later, but it's an art form that's like a muscle in the gym. It's something you have to exercise, even if you're just doing it, yourself, just to keep your skills up, to make sure you can still do it often, practice until you're blue in the face, and then practice some more, because You practice like you play. And if you're not practicing like you play when it's game time and the pressure's actually on, things tend to go, sideways a little bit.
Right. So, right. Yeah. And that practice also will help you memorize what you are trying to say. so that it's not completely ad hoc the entire time. Because it's important to also be relatable. You don't want to be up there sounding like a robot. You don't want to be up there with obvious, you're reading line by line from a document or a page or something like that. So being relatable can also be beneficial in order to, keep your audience engaged. But you don't want to be, there's a fine line between that. You don't want to come off as just way too informal, which can also, turn people off to disengage and things like that. So yeah, just to bolster up, it is an art form. It really is. Some people, and it can come very naturally to some people, and others have to really work at it in order to be effective with it and stuff like that. But everybody should be able to get their point across and keep their audience engaged. It's just how much practice you have to do to perform that.
Yeah, I mean, like it doesn't show in a lot of this, but like I'm an extreme introvert by nature. Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, that's just, I mean, my wife will tell you, like, I'm an extreme introvert, and getting in front of people and talking and doing things like this used to terrify the living Jesus out of me. But it's almost like immersion therapy. It's like the more you do it, the better you get it. So I only have like 13 minutes. So I'm going to speed through some of this stuff, but like Tarantino a bit because we only have 13 minutes. How to tell them what you told them. It's actually really simple. You always end things with a Q&A session. Again, just to make sure there's no lingering issues. Always start, thank you for that. Again, it's just like the little pleasantries, the things that make it. Thank you for that question. Go and address the question. And then at the very end, did I answer your question? And, if not, let's follow up. What can I do to follow up afterwards? Make sure to send him an email, set up another meeting. And then you repeat your purpose statement again, because like that's the thing. If the last words out of your mouth in that meeting are going to be the thing that you want them to remember, you repeat that purpose statement, short, focused, and relevant. And to get into like the how to say what you want to say or engaging your audience, there's like 8. Some people say 11. I'm more for brevity. There's like 8 generally accepted principles that most people are considered great presenters or great speakers, whatever you want to call it, they use. First you already mentioned is speak to the interests of your audience. And you do that by understanding them, which we'll go over in a little bit. The second one is use stories or anecdotes to illustrate your points. Why? They make the information relevant, and people literally remember a story far longer than they remember facts or figures. Third one, and this is more relevant now because we're getting back, into in-person presentations, eye contact. Zoom meetings, it's kind of hard because you're just staring at a camera. But in person, don't stare, but also don't be what I like to call a hummingbird. So if you've ever seen a hummingbird, its head's constantly whipping around, checking back and forth for danger. Like you don't want to do that because then it just makes you seem a little manic, unprepared, scared.
Yeah.
So when you're making eye contact, and this is something you learn over time, but when you're practicing it, maybe in front of a mirror with your significant other, try to aim for like 3 to 4 seconds before moving on to somebody else, because that'll give you a chance to focus, but it'll also stabilize your head. So if you're talking around here and then you can gently shift, it's not too fast. It's not too short. It's like they say in the Three Pigs, it's just right.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to just keep staring at somebody because then that just turns awkward.
Yeah. Well, it's the friendly face syndrome like the people have, is they'll tend to pick one friendly face in the audience and then they'll go full blown tunnel vision and they'll just look at that one face and then everybody's like, maybe you know that person, maybe you don't. It might get a little weird. So number 4, avoid props. I know hand puppets can be fantastic and fun, but I know, Steven, I'm crushing your dreams, but leave them and the whiteboard at home. And we'll go into visuals a little more in part 2, but visuals as well. Like if they're not illustrating a point, keep them as minimal as possible because the focus needs to be on you and your message and what you're trying to get across.
I don't know, man. Props. It worked for Carrot Top.
We're not Gallagher. We're not smashing, watermelons. We're not doing any of that nonsense. Keep the props at home for the comedy show. 5th, relax. For the love of God, relax. If you're relaxed, they'll be relaxed. Just remember, and it's all our own personal insecurities. Nobody's rooting for you to fail. They know you put in good work to say what you're going to say. They want you to do well. And if for the most selfish reason of all, nobody wants to sit through a horrible or a garbage presentation.
Right.
It's a waste of everybody's time. So they're rooting for you to make it interesting. They're rooting for you to be good. So don't worry about that. Sixth, and again, this is relevant in person, own the room. Don't sit in your chair. Don't stand in one spot, like rooted like a tree, like Captain America likes to do. We're not Captain Americas in this. Have you ever seen like a stand-up comedy special? Like, I know you have, but this is more for the audience. If you've noticed like any kind of stand-up comedy special or show, watch how they move. They don't stand in one spot. They're also not pacing back and forth like they're walking the yard in prison. They'll stay in one spot to make a point or tell a joke, and then they'll move to another spot, make a different point, make a different joke, but it's usually in, a plane. And that's another way to get your audience's attention or to have them re-engage, because physiologically, just our eyes and our brain, we're wired to be drawn to movement. So if you're just standing in that one spot, our brain disengages. If you're kind of, constantly shifting, moving, it'll keep us engaged.
Is that hunter, old school hunter, you're sitting there looking at the landscape and you spot movement and then poof, right to it.
I'd be picking fruit or vegetables, whatever. But you hunters can go do your thing. My last name's Gardner, so I guess that means back in the old days you were Gardner, plowing the fields. Seventh, read the room. Look for glances, frowns, smirks, sighs. This will help you. People checking their cell phones. This will kind of help you if it's time to move on, if somebody's confused, or if a point needs to be clarified. And pay close attention to eye contact. So one surefire way to know that you're losing people's attention, can't do it so much in a Zoom. Well, you kind of can. If you see people's eyes look like they're reading or they're on their keyboard, they might not be paying attention. But in person, quickest way to know if you're losing attention is if you lose their eye contact. And last but not least, get the audience involved. Kind of like how I did at the very beginning. The easiest way to do it is to ask a question and wait for a response. A trickier one, which I don't see used very often anymore, but it's still one of my favorites, is to say, I want you to write this down. So you literally get people to open up their laptops, get out their notebook, get a pen. It just forces them to be in the moment, and then tell them something you want them to remember. You can ask for their opinion, have them I've seen in conferences hey, raise your hand if such and such and such, or if you know somebody in the audience, and they do this, I reference comedy shows a lot because my buddy's a stand-up comedian, have a plant in the audience. If you know somebody well, ask them a question directly, specifically, and then that can kind of break the ice and make it a little bit more friendly.
That's important, man. You want a relaxed atmosphere. Nobody wants to go sit in a stuffy, presentation and just be uncomfortable. Nobody, that'll get everybody disengaged. It makes the presenter feel horrible. It makes the audience well, this could have been an email, whatever the case is. And I mean, I don't really have much else to say about that.
It's all good. We have 6 minutes left. So I know I said we're going to talk about, understanding your audience. A few tips I found to work well and some questions to pose to yourself about the audience. So the best tip for small groups is literally to understand them. Just go ask. Again, this will not only help you understand them, it'll help build up that relationship, which may not be there ahead of the meeting. So you can get a better feel for things like, do they like to laugh? Are they serious? Do they use certain lingo, certain verbiage? Do they keep repeating a certain word often? That's normally when you're back in college, if the professor says the same thing 3 times, you should probably write that down. It's going to be important. Same thing when you're talking to someone. If they use the same, I'm not call it a buzzword, but if they talk risk, or threat, or this, use that and incorporate that in your presentation. So the questions to ask yourself, just for any meeting, is, do you know their titles, their roles, and their responsibilities? You might know their names, but if you don't actually know what they do, it's going to be hard to tailor the presentation to them. Also, who's that chief decision maker in the room? You may have a lot of decision makers in the room, but who's the one, the Highlander of that group, who's going to make the final call? And what's that person's expectations, so you can know how you can meet them.
Right.
And then, what do they know about what you're going to present? That's key, because again, especially in like a very tech heavy industry that we're in, there's a lot of buzzwords, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of technology. Like if you're presenting to executives, they might not know all the things that we're talking about. They may not know about lol bins and process hijacking, all the fun. Like they just don't know it. So understand what they know, and will you need to set the stage before making certain points in your presentation? Like do a little explanation, or maybe send out some, I don't want to call it homework, but like a pre-read just to get people up to speed so you can go through it. And then lastly, what do they know about you? Like, do they just know, hey, it's Stephen Davis, lead customer advisor? Do they know anything about you apart from your title and role? That's really all I've got for today. But as they say in the military, the more you prepare in peace, the less you bleed in war. So practice, practice, practice being an effective presenter. You're also a storyteller. You're a comedian. It's like working the muscle. If you don't exercise it when it's needed, and won't be able to perform like you need to. It may sound silly, but if you have a local community college or a college nearby, take an improv class. Again, it was something that was it. Dude, I know. I laughed till my head almost fell off. I was like, "Are you serious?" But the reason why I say take an improv class is it teaches you to think on your feet. It teaches you, like, one of the things is like never say no. It's always a yes. But at some point, technology, presentation, script, something is going to go sideways at some point, and just being able to think on the fly and also to get people to laugh. Yeah. I mean, laughter is, like the doctors say, it's the best medicine. It's amazing how I use laughter, and if I can get people to curse, like if people start cursing around me, I know people have lowered their guard. Even if I'm not saying F bombs, but some of the other words that exist in the lexicon of curse words, they start dropping those. I know I've got them. I know I've made a connection. I know this is going to be a good meeting. Or if I can get them to do a genuine laugh, not like, like an actual, like a laugh, it's going to be good. Like if you see the crease lines, like they're actually smiling again, like pay attention to the facial gestures, like then you've got them hooked, and just keep re-engaging throughout the presentation and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And it's really important that to kind of circle back to what you said, nobody wants you to fail, right? They wouldn't show up to that presentation if they didn't want to actively know what you are talking about and what you are presenting. Now, that's not 100% the case. Some people, hey, make sure you go to that. I understand that. But for the most part, yeah, relax. Practice what you talk. If you are an individual that is, gets anxiety or very nervous before meetings, which is kind of ironic for the line of work that I'm in. But when I first started as a CA, man, I would lose sleep before big meetings. Just constantly in my head, like, what if I do this? What if I do this? And it wasn't until I just kept doing them and doing them and doing them. Now, yeah, I get a little nervous every now and then, but once I start talking, the being comfortable, the experience comes into play and things like that. So,
you before I have you sign everybody off, you made me think of one thing that one of my college professors told me about studying that I also apply to presentations, which is do not do it the night before or the day before. Take the day, like if you're presenting on a Wednesday, stop all your prep, stop all your practice, stop everything on Monday. Let yourself relax on Tuesday, because anything you put in on Tuesday or Tuesday night or Wednesday morning is going to push, unless you're a genius, which I'm not, it's going to push something out, and it's just going to make you even more nervous. So take that day to relax. You've learned everything that you're going to learn. You know everything you're going to know. It's out of your hands at that point. It's either going to go great or it's going to go horrible.
Yep.
Have fun with it. Just enjoy the experience and do the thing.
Exactly.
So sign us off, Steve. We got 30 seconds, man.
All right, everyone. I really appreciate you all tuning in for this special live episode of Lost Bots. This is, again, part 1. We will be coming out with a part 2, which I'm very, very excited about, because I, like everybody here, I just I enjoy when Jeffrey talks. You're a good talker, man. You're a great presenter.
Somebody does.
Yeah. I may be one of the only ones. But that about wraps it up for today. Again, stay tuned for part 2, where we will be getting into the practicals or what some of those security metrics or topics are that work best alongside a great presentation and things like that. So a lot of tips and tricks there, a lot of good information. But again, thanks for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.